Welcome again. And for those of you who may be new to Sunday morning sitting group, this is what we do. We sit for half an hour. We practice meditation for half an hour together. Then we have some teachings and then some conversation and a chance for some exchange with each other. So we begin by sitting. I'll do a little bit of guided meditation at the beginning, just and maybe a prompt or two on Zoom. I've noticed it's a little more distracting to meditate together than when we're in person. So an occasional prompt, but mostly we trust the silence. We trust the mind's ability to gradually unwind and release whatever it is that's been holding us back from being simply and fully present with our whole being for this moment of life, the only moment we actually have. So please make yourselves comfortable. I'm just going to get the bell. I'll be right back. So I'll ring the bell to begin, and just want to encourage you to listen to the sound of the bell all the way to its vanishing point. It really helps to move from the sound into the silence. Now, taking a deep breath in and releasing. And again. Just letting go of everything that came before this moment and everything that may follow. And noticing the quality of attention of the mind. If it's kind of sleepy and dull, you can bring a little extra attention to the in-breath, the energizing breath. The mind is jumpy, activated about something, or just busy. Just bring a little extra attention to the out-breath. The calming, releasing out-breath. And if focusing on the movement of the breath in the body is not soothing or calming or relaxing for you, then just relax into being present with sounds of life around you as they appear and fade away. With a general awareness of the body as a field of sensation. the dance of sensation, moving, shifting, appearing, disappearing. And sitting quietly together, we allow the thinking to calm down. We open all the senses, opening all the senses to experience life in the fullness of this moment. Life before thinking. And when you notice the mind is lost in thought, just move your body gently back, half an inch or an inch, shifting the posture back slightly into this posture of receptivity, receiving the moment, receiving the breath in the body. Receiving the sounds of life, the myriad phenomena of this shifting, changing, kaleidoscopic reality we call this moment. riding the waves of breath, the waves of experience, of pleasure, of pain, of joy and sorrow. Of mindful awareness and forgetting. And whenever you find yourself tipping forward, anticipating the next moment, what's next? Again, just shifting the body back ever so slightly into being present right now, receiving this moment. full of nowness. And for the last part of this sitting, just noticing the beginnings and endings of the breath, of a sound, how each experience is born, has its being, and passes away. This is the way things are. And as we sit, we're seeing, being mindful of, bringing attention to awareness of the birth and death of experience. Seeing life in the form of this moment appear and vanish. So welcome everybody once again. It's wonderful to sit together. I see that some of you are calling from hot places, from the desert. I was in the ocean this morning, and so I'm actually cold right now. But the water is wonderful, and it was foggy and beautiful. There, the pelicans and surfers and me. So this morning, I want to continue with our study of the factors of awakening, the elements of awakening, sometimes called the 7 factors of enlightenment. And I spent the first 2 weeks of this series speaking about equanimity and balance. And last week, Eric McCullum taught about investigation. I heard that he had some frustrating trouble with his sound during the meditation. We'll have to have him back at some point when he can come back. But these 7 elements, just quick reminder, they are divided into 2 sets of 3. What are called the arousing elements, the energizing ones of joy and effort and enthusiasm for the practice, and that quality of curiosity or investigation or exploring, the interest of exploring. And then the 3 that are called the calming qualities, which would be concentration and tranquility and equanimity. And then the 7th is mindfulness, which is like the fulcrum of a seesaw, helping these stay in balance, the awareness that is mindfulness. And I want to just say a few words about mindfulness today, because I was reflecting, it'll be 20 years since I did pilgrimage and a 1-month Dzogchen retreat in Bhutan, in the eastern mountain jungles of Bhutan. And I happened to find a little notebook. I don't keep journals, I'm sorry to say, I wish I did, but just a little notebook with some notes from that trip, going through some stuff. I found it, and I was remembering what it was like to be in such a completely different environment in the high Himalayas. And 20 years ago, Bhutan was still, I really don't know what it's like today. But having watched what happened to Nepal with the influx of tourists and hippies, and Bhutan kept its borders very tight and made it very expensive for people to spend time there from the outside. And when I was there, people were they were not allowed to wear jeans and things like that. They were wearing their traditional Bhutanese dress, with the royal family being very intent on preserving the traditional culture. There was one teeny weeny little internet cafe in Thimphu. That's all. I'm sure that's changed. And we traveled all the way did pilgrimage to various sites, and then great monasteries where great mythical Dharma things had happened in the past, and then went to Mongar, which is all the way toward the east, in the eastern mountain jungles, where we camped out for a month, camping in the mountains there, and did a Dzogchen retreat. Dzogchen is sort of like, it's the Tibetan Buddhist practice of the Nyingmapa tradition of Tibet. I shouldn't even call it Tibetan Buddhism. It's Himalayan Buddhism, Vajrayana practice and Himalayan Buddhism. And I had just begun practicing in that tradition after my divorce. I just needed a break from Zen and also from Vipassana and insight meditation, which I had been also doing a lot, and experienced tremendous joy being in this, wilderness place and receiving teachings that were so different from the ones I had learned in the context of my practice in the West, and yet being able to see how these teachings, even though they were expressed in such a different cultural form, different imagery, different practices, different methods, but how they were all pointing to the same truths, these truths of wisdom and compassion, um, and mindfulness and everything that we're studying here together. So much joy to see this. And it was also very amazing to go to, let's say there was one monastery that was, it had been built around a cave where Guru Rinpoche, who was sort of the Tibetan Buddha, the one who brought Buddhism to Tibet in the 7th century, Padmasambhava, where Guru Rinpoche had been practicing in a cave and had, this is the legend, had leaned back against the back of the cave, probably to sleep, because retreat practice in that tradition, even today, if you do the classic 3-year retreat, my friend Lama Surya Das explained this to me. You build a wooden box and you sit in that box. You never lie down to sleep. So when you're sleeping, you just kind of lean back or you fall against the sides of the box. It's like a diorama with an open front. So he was in this cave and probably that's where he slept. And in any case, the legend is that his body left an imprint in the rock of the cave. And as you know, a skeptical Westerner, I entered this temple and there's these 3 big rooms with deities and images of Guru Rinpoche, to whom I have no connection. And I have no way of explaining this, but tears popped into my eyes as if I loved Guru Rinpoche with all my heart and was so moved to see that imprint in the rock. And they painted a little halo around the head part with blue and gold paint. And I think the power of blessing is so strong in certain places where people come and do pilgrimage and offer vows and revere what the being stands for, who is being revered in that place, revering the dedication and the love that that being has been able to manifest in their contemplative life. The power of all those accumulated blessings just really opened my heart and was a beautiful way to begin our mountain retreat. And I just have to share with you my campsite because it was my favorite campsite ever in the whole wide world. And I don't really go camping anymore because I'm married to somebody who doesn't enjoy that so much and who really thinks that, you know, camping is like nice sheets and a nice bed, and maybe glamping would be okay if you've ever gone to those fancy camp places with tents on platforms and cushy beds. And anyway, that would probably be fine. But this campsite was away from the main flat area where most people put up their tents. I called it town because all the tents, you know, humans just flock together and they put their tents all close together, and I could hear people snoring, and no, that wasn't for me. So I actually hiked way up and I found this spot where it was a promontory, you know, like the bow of a ship, pointing out into space. Now we're in the Himalayas. These are huge mountains. And if you haven't seen them like I hadn't, and you aren't used to seeing them, you look up in the sky and you think it's clouds, but it's actually, the mountains are that high. So there were cliffs on either side of this spot and a river way down in the valley below. But it was like camping in the sky. It was so beautiful and wonderful. And of course, you know, camping has its cold times and maybe uncomfortable times, but it was just an amazing experience. And the Rinpoche who guided us during that retreat gave us beautiful teachings. And at the end of the retreat, we had a feast and a celebration, and it was a big deal in this part of the country that this retreat was happening with Westerners and with this great teacher. And so it was a huge gathering of community and a feast offering, and the local judge was sending his daughter, she had just turned 15, very young daughter, to come back to Thimphu, the capital, with us when we went back. And she, to make a long story short, it turned out she kept wanting to sleep with me and Kate Wheeler, who we were sharing a room. She kept wanting to sleep in our bed with us. And after, it was narrow, hard beds, and in our travels, it wasn't that comfortable, although it was wonderful. And at one point, we just said, Urgent, why don't you stay in your own room? It might be more comfortable for all of us. We might sleep better. And she burst into tears and said, I can't stay alone in my room because the Rinpoche is trying to trap me and get me into his tent. And she just was sobbing. And it was a really difficult experience for us to understand, because even in Bhutan, it's not okay to, sleep with kids. And it was a very jarring experience. And I'm telling you about this because to me, that experience and that story and having to hold both sides of this teacher, the generosity and immense effort of taking us, way out into the jungle and setting up a camp that would be, we could have food and a tent to practice in, and the tents had beautiful dragons appliqued onto the canvas of the tents, and we put pine needles for the floor of the tent. And I mean, it was just so much effort and so many beautiful Dharma teachings. And yet also, this was a very obviously unhappy in certain ways, unsatisfied, flawed, mischievous. I don't even know what to call it, but it was definitely mischief is too, I think, diminishing of the seriousness of the harm. And to be able to hold the paradox of this, I'm talking about this particular teacher, but it could be any teacher. It could be anybody that we idealize, and that we idealize for good reasons, because they are brilliant in their way. They've dedicated themselves to learning something that we want to learn ourselves, and they're teaching it. But anytime we idealize somebody, we're also leaving out the fact of their humanness and the fact that they may have their own problems and issues and flaws. And to me, this is where mindfulness comes in. This is where mindfulness helps us to balance and see clearly and hold with some balanced perspective what one Roshi used to call plus and minus in the same room, right? The positive and the negative in the same heart. Love and hate can peacefully exist in this heart. And so just as mindfulness balances the arousing factors and the stabilizing factors in our practice, it's really called the central pathway to liberation, because it allows us to see clearly and in the round, to have presence and clarity, but with a balanced perspective. And what this means is that mindfulness allows us to hold the paradox of our humanity, of human life, of this incarnation. And that everything we experience, and you could see it just in this little slice of life that we called our meditation this morning, that you experience the birth and death, the beginning and end, the beauty and the pleasure, and perhaps the suffering and the boredom and whatever else you were going through during this half hour. And we see that every experience, even the most sublime and beautiful visit to Guru Rinpoche's cave or to a retreat, comes to an end. And in the same way, every terrible experience, every pandemic, every war, every horror in life does come to an end too. And we take our refuge in this more spacious field of awareness itself. And just as you were shifting back, when you would start to get distracted in your meditation, I would say, just shift the body back, like just a half an inch or an inch. That's taking this backward step into the field of awareness itself, into receiving the moment without all of the judgments and ideas and concepts that we usually layer, right on top of it. But to say, this is how it is right now. It may not be the way I want it to be. It's certainly not the way I expected it to be, or I was told it would be, but this is how it is right now. And that within everything that mindfulness is aware of, there's also this heart quality that mindfulness can see with respect and tenderness and understanding. All these worldly winds of fame and loss of reputation, of pleasure, of pain, of winning, of losing, of gain and loss, all the opposites of our experience. And we see that just as light has two dimensions, the dimension of wave and the dimension of particle, that at first completely confused scientists. They were surprised and confounded, the physicists, and yet they came to see both are true. And if we're to become wise in this practice, and mindfulness is the gateway to wisdom in this practice, we see that every human being has both beautiful qualities and flaws, every single one of us. And that the quality of mindfulness is to be able to see this and to be able to say, oh, okay, this is what it's like to be human. This is what it's like to be a human being, exactly as we are. Mindfulness doesn't judge or get caught up in our previous ideas of things, bringing the past constantly to bear. But mindfulness can see the gridlock in our government right now, between those who think government is bad and those who think government can help the world. Or I'm thinking of Ram Dass, who always kept, along with all the beings, the spiritual beings that were his inspiration, his teacher and all the teachers of his lifetime and their teachers and his beloved friends, that he also included on his altar Dick Cheney. He had President Trump on his altar. It's like that Oscar Wilde quote. He said, "It takes a great deal of courage to see the world in all its tainted glory and still to love it. This is the way the world is. Can I love it? Can you love it? This is the way I am. Can I love myself? This is the way you are. Can you love yourself? Just as you are." As we say in the metta phrase, may I love myself completely, just as I am. Because this is the way it is. And this is what helps us have the peace and equanimity and balance to be able to do the other function of mindfulness. If it just was about receiving the moment, it would be a passive withdrawal from experience and from life. But the full phrase that's used for mindfulness in the classic texts of early Buddhism is sati sampajanya, which means mindfulness and clear comprehension of the full context of what we're aware of. And it really points to that we have, yes, mindfulness, but we also have, and they always translate the word appropriate as suitable. Mindfulness and a suitable response to what we see. And this second part, the suitable response part, is what helps us see what would be a wise or good or appropriate response to the world or to the situation that we find ourselves in. And so this too is the paradox of practice, the seeing, but then the acting as well. It's not enough to simply see. We all know, we're very aware, we've had insights into how we are, but that doesn't necessarily change things that need to be changed. So we quiet the mind we open the heart to see the world as it is in all its tainted glory. And then, like breathing in and breathing out, we're humans. We can't always breathe in. We can't always breathe out. We do both. We breathe in things as they are, and we respond in whatever way we can. And these are the two sides of our practice, the clarity and the response. And there's, along with the teachings of mindfulness, there's all these other teachings of the Brahma Viharas, the beautiful places the heart can dwell, love, joy, equanimity, compassion, care. These all go together. And the Buddha was really clear in his community. If one of the monastics was sick and didn't come to go on the alms round and collect food, or didn't come to practice together, you must visit them. You have to see what's happening and then take care of them as though they're your actual brother or sister, son or daughter. And this came up once because a monk had been really sick and had diarrhea all over them, and nobody wanted to, obviously they were reeking and nobody wanted to go there. And so the Buddha went and washed that person, washed them and cleaned them and helped them and showed everybody, this is what we do. We need the discernment to know what is motivating our actions. Are our actions based on generosity and love? Are they based on ethical understanding? Because we can see the causes of suffering. We can see the greed, the hatred, the fear, the confusion, and we don't have to act on those. We can pause and we can reflect. We can reflect. What is our intention? As a couples therapist, this was a great practice for couples, especially when you're at odds with each other. Before you say that devastating, shredding, relationship shredding thing, to just stop for a moment and say, what is my intention? Is it to be right or is it to be close? Is it to have the last word or is it to love each other better? These are situations that we're in personally where we can exercise this. And we're in a situation today, and many of them collectively, that what is it like to look at it clearly and to see how we might respond with generosity, wisdom, and love. And in the news, along with all the bad news, there's also news of people who are doing amazing things. Like I heard about this guy in Washington State, I think he's from Seattle, who found out that farmers were having to destroy crops because restaurants weren't ordering the food, they weren't getting the orders for the food. And so they were destroying food, their crops. And so he figured out how to get that food to food banks in the urban areas. And people donated trucks and they donated campers and pickups. And anyway, he said it only took really a few minutes, but suddenly the food banks were being supplied with the potatoes and onions and gosh, I must be hungry because I'm thinking of fried potatoes with onions. It sounds good, doesn't it? But we can always contribute something, is the point. I read that there's been a wonderful summer for growing grapes so far, lots of sunshine, but when the vendange comes, when the harvest of the grapes comes, the vintners are going to have to basically throw away a lot of the wine. And I thought somebody in France needs to get that wine to the food banks. Can you imagine serving not just potatoes and onions and things, but some of the finest French wines that people who are hungry could have with that meal? So I hope somebody in France will somehow get some of those barrels of delicious harvest somewhere where they can be ripened and turned into wine to share with the world that can't pay for it at restaurants and stuff. Anyway, it's really, mindfulness is so important. You can see it in the decisions, the decisions of a few men that sweep the world across the lives of generations with their decisions. I'm thinking of, certain heads of state, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to invite you to have like some questions, some conversation. Instead of Q&A, I like to say Q&R, questions and reflections. And Akemi and Kenny are moderating today.
Rand is on here too.
And Rand, thank you, volunteers, and thank you everybody for being here with your practice. If you have a question or reflection, you can raise your hand inside the chat function, the participant place down below, or you can just wave wildly, and hopefully one of our moderators will scroll through the pages and see you. Bob has raised his hand. You can unmute Bob. Bob is somebody that I worked with decades ago in Cambridge, both of us therapists who worked with kids. So go ahead, Bob.
Hi, Trudy. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all this morning. It's great. I've been doing this for a few months now. It's great to start recognizing familiar faces. I live in Sonoma County, California. Wow, really liked your teaching this morning. And the reflection I have about it is that, for a number of years, 3 or 4 years, I've been sending loving kindness to one of my least favorite political leaders. As I was listening to it, occurred to me something that I tend to not be as aware of as I'd like to be, is that it starts to become rote. It's like I say it, and that's better than not saying it, but I don't always feel it, because it's really hard to feel because of the reasons you just described. It's hard to hold how much I dislike, what he's doing and how much. And so as I listened to you, I thought, oh yeah, I need to pay more attention to that. So it's not just automatic. So it really is real. And yesterday something happened that I think will help me with that, which is I was talking to my niece who lives in Georgia, who's a fundamentalist Christian, who I love a lot and respect a lot. The way she leads her life and she and her husband lead their lives is, a lot of love and service and integrity in how they lead their lives. And I don't talk to her really often, but we ended up in a conversation about the pandemic. And all of a sudden I thought I was listening to a Donald Trump infomercial about masks and I was horrified. And she started out by saying, well, we're probably on two different sides of this. Mm-hmm. And boy, I was shocked at how much we were on different sides of that, because it seemed to fly in the face of common sense. But when I heard her, like the evidence that she's looking at, she actually felt like she'd done her own due diligence and didn't buy it. And I had to make sense of that. And it actually helped me that I love her.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Because I don't love Donald Trump, but I love her. And so for the last 24 hours, I've been having to figure out how to hold both of those. And because I love her, I can actually. And I'm alternately horrified and still in love with her as much as I was since she was born. And I just realized how much feeling I have about that since yesterday. And so when I heard you this morning, I thought that's exactly what I needed to hear. It's like the kind of the mindfulness it takes, but also what you said about the response, and the word that also came to me was courage. You have to have courage to love somebody. I don't have to need courage to love her, but I need courage to love Donald Trump.
Well, it's like Oscar Wilde. He said it takes a great deal of courage to see the world in all its tainted glory, to see both sides of the world and to still love it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
thank you. And
thank
to
you.
understand that your niece like so many, is living in a completely different world of information.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's the difficulty.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I want to come back to, thank you, Bob. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Trudy.
Before somebody else, I want to address Pam's question in the chat. She said, I was kind of upset hearing the story of the 15-year-old girl. What happened? Was she protected? Was he held to account? It seems criminal and scary, and it triggered stuff. Yes, of course. Yes, she was protected. She was protected by Leela and me until, and also I chose to speak to the group about what had happened, which did divide the group, because there is a tradition in Himalayan Buddhism where it's very, very inauspicious to ever criticize a teacher, and that you can actually affect their longevity by such criticism. So there were people who really didn't speak to me. And in one case, for somebody that we've, had to have interaction, it took many years for her to be able to speak to me again. And one of the teachers who was with us also spoke about in the wider community, for which she was, a very mixed response. Let's just put it that way. Some people excoriating her, and some people celebrating the courage to speak up. And Leela and I did stay in touch with Urgent until she grew up, and she's fine. So you know that. In terms of holding that teacher to account, no, that can't happen in that culture, because not only are the teachers raised to be princes and told basically that they can have whatever they want, that it's considered, and this is something that goes into a much huger discussion culturally, but there's a tradition of considering it a blessing if such a powerful, enlightened being, and I'm putting enlightened in just scare quotes for a moment, but wants to sleep with you, then I don't know, you'll be reborn as something wonderful. A man, maybe? Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that right now. But yes, she was safe. And we did speak up, and we did follow through. Yeah.
There's no hands up. Does anybody have a reflection or question?
And I saw Lisa saying we can't idealize, but I think we're always going to idealize, because we're human, and also because there's a place for idealization. It's not all bad, like most things. I'm not putting child abuse in that category, but idealization is very useful when we start out to practice. It's very useful to look up to people and imagine, well, they're people and they did this, so I can do this too. Or even at the beginning, I was a therapist for many years. When people would begin psychotherapy, they would idealize me. I was the all wise, all helpful, and that's useful at the beginning, because therapy, like meditation practice, if you practice sincerely, it's hard. It takes courage to face everything that arises in our psyches, and to realize that what we call reality, our conventional understanding of reality, is not that real. It can be disorienting and frightening to understand the emptiness of things that we consider to be very solid, or to be able to see things in such a dramatically different way, as not having the meaning that we conventionally attribute to them. But even without that level of depth of practice, even just to face all of who we are, takes a lot of guts. And the idealization at the beginning is an encouragement. It's just that it should be something that hopefully we grow out of at a certain point. It's just like idealizing our parents. That's really helpful, because we want to imitate them and learn from them. And then when we become teenagers, right, we start to see the other side. So I'm just putting in a word for healthy development, and that there's room for many, many dimensions of our understanding as we grow and mature. both psychologically, spiritually, hopefully in all ways. So Emily has her hand up. Can we unmute Emily?
Hi. So I'm
Can I see
coming
you,
to
Emily?
you from.
Is it possible
Well,
to put your video on?
I have an unstable
Oh, okay.
connection, so
Okay.
I turn my video off and
Okay, that's fine.
hope that I don't drop out. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I'm coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio today, and I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
So I've been here, yeah. I've been hearing a lot about people who want to, quote unquote, get back to normal. And normal to me has been that which causes me anxiety, craziness, insanity. Not that I haven't been insane, but I feel it to be an insane proposition, what the normal society has been. And that's what drove me to meditation, actually. And I would like to hear if you could speak a little bit about what is normal.
What is normal? Is that the question, or did you?
What is normal within the context of inner work, inner development, meditation? What's your understanding of that?
Well, I don't feel like there's really anything that's normal in the sense of a baseline that we would all conform to, or that reality would conform to. And when I talk about normalizing experience, maybe a better word would be humanizing experience. And when people talk about getting back to normal, Emily, you understand they're talking about wanting their life back that they had before. Oh, there you are. I see who you are. Thank you. They're talking about wanting the life that they had before back. And we know that whatever happens when the pandemic ends, things will be different. And they may never be exactly the way they were before. Just like people who have COVID and recover are discovering that actually they may not be ill, but they aren't who they were before. Or I had a very severe accident years ago that I have talked about in the past, where I was hit by a car as a pedestrian, broke a bunch of bones, and was really, really thought I was being killed, but luckily I wasn't. But I remember longing for my body to get back to normal and having to face it was never going to be the way it was before. So I don't have a definition of normal. Maybe somebody else does, but that which is called normal, as you pointed out, is often actually quite insane or cruel or unfair or unjust. And yet we accept it because we're used to it. And I think that's actually dangerous. So I appreciate your calling out of what's normal, because I think we can start to accept that it's normal to detain children and separate them from their parents. Or we could start to accept that it's normal not to provide asylum for people whose lives are in danger, who could be safe here, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a slippery slope. So thank you for that question. And maybe somebody else will chime in. If you look at the chat, Emily, people are starting to chime in. So you can see. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And then to come back to Bob's question that I didn't answer at all, that Laura picked up about how do you keep metta practice from becoming rote at times? In other words, mechanical, where you're saying the phrases, but you're not feeling love, or you're not even feeling particularly positive. I don't think there's any way to keep that from happening sometimes. Sometimes our practice becomes rote or lifeless or boring, and we're just going through the motions of it. But to me, that's part of what develops strength and what cultivates yeah, what cultivates strength. It's like parenting. There are times when you don't feel like it. There are times when you just put them out with the trash. I mean, you just are done, at that moment, but you still keep taking care of them. And that's part of, I think, what strengthens and matures people who do become parents. There are other ways, of course, to strengthen and mature in this life, and being dedicated to something and keeping at it. Artists know this. It's even happened to me. I love Sunday mornings, but it has happened that I'd rather stay in the ocean, frankly, and not come back and change and put on, Zoom clothes and teach. So, there are these moments, Bob and everybody, when our metta practice does become rather mechanical and rote. And then what do we do with those moments? We need to keep going and keep practicing, but we can also change it up and do the practice in a different way. Like, I learned the way that they practice metta in Sri Lanka. They don't use these phrases that we use to anchor our attention and to carry the energy of the loving kindness. But what they do is invoke the feeling and then just stay with the feeling. And I learned this from Bhikkhu Analayo, who wrote that fabulous book on mindfulness, Satipatthana, the direct path to realization, and who has become a friend. And Analayo, he taught how he would evoke metta was he would look at the little chipmunks outside his cabin where he does his retreat practice and writes and lives at the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. And like, he would see one just kind of basking in the sunlight, and he would feel the pleasure of that feeling and let him feel that in his own body. Or I've shared with you that I had this experience. I still use it, even though it happened like probably a year ago at this point, where a tiny little kitten, I was walking the walk streets at night, and there was this tiny little kitten that kind of crawled up my leg, and I held it, and I felt a little heartbeat pulsing and held it on my neck. I just loved that little kitten. Anyway, it wasn't mine, and I had to let it go back to where it came from. But I've used that image of just that, the love I felt for that kitten in that moment as a way to evoke the metta when it starts to lose its juiciness for you. So you can do that too. You don't have to necessarily always use the phrases unless you're using them as a concentration practice. And then they can lead to states of deeper absorption in the meditation. But I think practicing like that, it also teaches us something about the craft of meditation. Well, the art and the craft of it. How, yeah, there are times when we're not inspired, but that doesn't mean we close up the studio and decide I'm not going to be an artist anymore, or whatever our thing is. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Questions or reflections?
And I guess I just want to say one more thing about that teacher who then pursued the girl after the retreat, and how I have since worked with that. There was a temptation, of course, to just throw away the teachings that we had received because, look, he turned out to be a no-goodnik, right? But in reality, those teachings were so wonderful, and I learned so much and had so much joy in the experience of learning with this teacher, that what I felt for myself was, we had a dinner, everybody together at the end of the trip, and his wife was there, a beautiful woman. And when she saw Urjin, the young girl at the table, she just stared for a moment and her eyes filled with tears. And I saw, oh my gosh, like, she knows. And she still is there. It's her family, they have little kids, it's her husband. I held it as of course, I never practiced with that teacher again. I never went and received teachings from them. And I did ask them about their relationship to ethical part of the practice, and challenge them in every way that I could while still being respectful as a visitor in that culture. But I also saw the loneliness of that person's position. And when we were in the Eastern Mountains, in the forest, the jungle, they call it, I remember stopping at one point, probably for a lunch or tea or something, and all the people from the vicinity had heard that this Rinpoche was coming, and they had flocked to that place. And when our van crossed to where we were going to park, they moved like a school of fish or a flock of birds, like everybody just flowed over to that spot, waiting to receive a glimpse of him and a blessing. And he blessed people on their heads. And I thought, oh my gosh, that must be such really a terrible life in some ways, to be held as a god and not be able to be human. In other words, developing some compassion, not as an excuse, not to deny or rationalize the behavior, but simply to recognize the humanness of this being as well. Meredith has her hand up. Can we unmute?
Go ahead, Meredith.
I unmuted. Okay, so I feel kind of nervous sharing, but I'm glad to be here this morning.
And thank you for your courage in speaking.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for yours. You're welcome. Partly what you've said so far. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm really grateful that you've told us that you sometimes want to stay in the ocean. And it's funny and it's not funny, because certainly I understand. And I think for myself, one of the things I've thought, in a way, I feel like some of the things you're talking about so far this morning, in my mind, is kind of the maturing of practice in, I only know the United States, so in this culture where I think I would love to hear from more teachers, not that I know a lot of teachers, but their own view of the reality that they're human, that sometimes they want to stay swimming. And it's not about them as bad teachers. It's not about students who are crummy students. It's about being human. And it's just fine.
Yes.
I mean, if you stay in the ocean week after week after week, with the understanding that it's okay to say, hey, how's it going? Feel like coming back? Talk it over. That's crucial. And when you were in the Himalayas and you had the experience, everybody had the experience of the young girl and the traditional Asian teacher. As practice moves into Western culture, my experience has been, even as a little girl in New England, for goodness sakes, father knows best. That's the funny side. And patriarchy and, don't ask any questions there, or certainly don't be honest, certainly not as a girl child. Because it was forbidden. And those seeming ethics can easily and have blended with a culture that I certainly don't know anything about. which is a long-standing Asian culture.
But even in our culture, Meredith, you can see it, and you can see
what?
You can see patriarchy and how it functions. You can see how the I've looked a lot in my life at feminism, particularly because being a woman and growing up in a world that was largely controlled by and defined by men. Now we're also having some reckoning in terms of race and understanding that so much of what we understand as known in science and psychology has been known about white people. And the studies have studied, just as those longitudinal developmental studies used to study boys and men and then apply it to all people,
Right.
that, white culture and Eurocentric education then applied to all people annihilates their realities and their cultural richness and perspectives and importance. And so we're coming to an end now, so we can continue this conversation next week. But I just appreciate your questioning of how things are and how we can find our own ethical standing, independent of culture.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, then we have to stop. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't understand how what I was saying connects with what you said. And maybe that's more than we have time to talk about right now.
Well, I didn't hear, maybe you could distill what you were saying into a question, and then
I'll give it a try.
Yeah, give it a try, because I guess I didn't understand you.
Oh, I don't know who wasn't understanding, but
well, we missed each other somewhere there.
Yeah, I hear that. What are the practices that focus on differentiating Asian culture, which is brought in through practice into Western culture? This untouchable God concept. How do we, through
it doesn't
practice,
work in Western culture.
I know, I think you and I are
absolutely.
saying the same thing.
Yes, we are. We're just using different words to say
right.
the same.
But part of practice is to differentiate and to be very clear and learn that over time. Standing up and asking questions and sometimes being angry and, can be very compassionate.
Yes, absolutely
Yes.
right. And that's part of the maturation of the student, has to come to terms. We used to have to ask ourselves, how much of this is Dharma teaching and how much of this is this person's culture? If
That's
they're
right.
from
That's right.
Or wherever they were from. And that takes time to tease out the difference.
Years. Yeah.
So thank you for making that point, because those things don't fly in our culture.
No. And sometimes the differentiation isn't made.
Well, often the differentiation.
Here we go. Hooray, we met. Thank you.
Often the differentiation.
Often.
So, Kemi
Have a good week.
has announcements to make and to talk about Dharma. Thank you. Go ahead, Kemi.
Hi, everyone. So really quick before we close, I just wanted to announce next weekend we're having Dr. Kristen Neff, the founder of MSc Mindful Self-Compassion, is doing a 2-day workshop with us. So sign up if you're interested in learning powerful practices to increase your own self-compassion. We also have a new section on our website that lists all of our different affinity groups, from mindful aging to people of color. And if you want to create a new one, please just email me. And lastly, we're experiencing, as many nonprofits during this time, some financial hardship, and we're relying on the generosity of our community to keep our doors open, to have these practices be accessible to all who come, and we just really appreciate any generosity that you can spare during this really hard time. So you can donate at InsightLA.org/donate. And if you're interested in getting involved in some capacity as a volunteer in general or on fundraising, feel free to email me at kemi@InsightLA.org. Thanks, everyone.
And Kemi puts everything in the chat, all the resources and links and things for you if you haven't been looking at the chat. So let's just sit together for a moment. And Meredith, I'm really glad we got clear. Important, yeah. As our time together comes to an end, we take a moment to appreciate the benefit, whatever we've learned that's been helpful, of having this incredible blessing, privilege, luxury of being able to practice and study and be together in this way. And so we make this imaginative effort to offer, to share the blessing of our practice, of our meditation and study together. We offer the goodness of our practice to all beings everywhere, without exception. May we and all beings grow in our capacity to love this world and each other in all our tainted glory. So thank you, everybody, for your practice and your presence. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you,
Have a
Trudy.
wonderful week. A good
Thank you.
Sunday.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you, Trudy.
Stay
Bye,
warm
everybody.
if you're cold. Stay cool if you're hot.
Find the ocean.
Bye. Unmute
Thank you,
everybody.
Trudy.
Unmute everybody. We can say goodbye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Trudy.
you.
Lots to think about.
Bye.
Bye.
Lots
Lots
to
to
think
practice
about.
with this week.
Yes, lots to practice with this week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Blessings.
Bye.
Blessings.
Bye.
Thank
David.
you.
Bye. Thank you, Trudy.
Thank
Thank you, Trudy.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kemi. Thank you, Ran. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you, Trudy.
Bye, Jeff.